They warned me never to step foot in the old graveyard after dark, but curiosity has a way of outweighing fear. The iron gates creaked as I pushed them open, and a cold, unnatural wind brushed past me, carrying whispers I couldn't quite understand. Tombstones leaned like ancient sentinels, their inscriptions faded, some broken, some freshly disturbed. I told myself it was just the wind, just the night playing tricks, but then I saw it. A pale figure, small and trembling, standing just beyond the shadows, watching me with eyes that seemed far too alive for a graveyard. Every instinct screamed to run, but something about that gaze, haunted, lonely, desperate, kept me rooted in place. Little did I know, that first step into the cemetery would unravel truths I could never forget, testing my courage, my empathy, and forcing me to confront the restless souls trapped between life and death. They warned me never to step foot in the old graveyard after dark. Stories of vanished teenagers, strange noises, and ghostly sightings had circulated in our town for decades, and yet curiosity has a way of outweighing fear. It was a cold autumn evening, the sky a bruised purple fading into black, the wind carrying the faint scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. I hesitated at the edge of the iron gates, their rusted hinges groaning like a dying animal as I pushed them open. A metallic wail echoed through the fog-laden cemetery, and my heart jumped. The world seemed to hold its breath. I adjusted the strap of my camera and took a tentative step inside. The rows of tombstones stretched out before me, leaning like ancient sentinels, some cracked and moss-covered, others freshly disturbed. Shadows stretched and shifted unnaturally across the uneven ground, contorting with the rhythm of the swaying skeletal trees. I told myself it was just the wind, just the fog playing tricks, but the chill crawling up my spine suggested otherwise. With every cautious step, the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots sounded deafeningly loud. I could feel the oppressive weight of silence pressing down, broken only by distant creaks and groans of iron gates swaying somewhere in the darkness. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft and almost human, like the brush of a breath on my ear. I froze, spinning in every direction, but nothing stirred. My flashlight flickered, and in its narrow beam I caught a movement. A figure, a child, pale and trembling, stood near one of the taller mausoleums at the far end of the cemetery. Her small frame was still, almost ghost-like, yet I felt her eyes on me. They were too alive, too knowing for this place. My pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and fascination rooting me to the spot. I told myself it was my imagination, the fog and shadows playing cruel tricks. But something deep inside whispered that she was real. I stepped closer, my camera raised, fingers trembling. Every footstep seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing back at me from the rows of tombstones. The fog thickened around my ankles, curling and coiling like spectral fingers. I could barely see her now, only the faint glow of her pale skin in the moonlight. And then, as suddenly as she appeared, she vanished. I stumbled forward, the uneven ground betraying me, and my flashlight caught something disturbing, freshly disturbed soil, small footprints leading toward the oldest section of the graveyard. My stomach churned. The air felt heavier here, almost alive, as if the very earth was watching me. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, and I could swear I heard my name whispered by the wind. Multiple voices overlapping, urgent, pleading. Despite every instinct screaming to turn and run, I felt an unexplainable pull forward, a strange combination of dread and responsibility. That first step into the cemetery was more than a dare. It was a crossing into a world I had only glimpsed in whispered rumors and campfire stories. A world where the dead were not resting quietly, and where their sorrowful, lonely echoes could reach out and demand to be seen. I swallowed hard and took another step, bracing myself for whatever was waiting in the fog ahead. The chill in the air seemed to press against my chest, but I pressed on, knowing in my gut that whatever haunted this place, it wanted something from me, something only I could give. And with that, the gate creaked shut behind me as if sealing me into the graveyard's cold, spectral embrace. I moved deeper into the cemetery, my flashlight cutting through the thickening fog like a frail lifeline. Every step I took seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing back from unseen walls of mist, and with each echo my heart thudded harder in my chest. The pale figure of the child lingered somewhere just beyond the veil of fog. Fleeting and elusive, her presence both haunting and compelling. The wind picked up, whistling through the skeletal branches overhead, carrying faint whispers that sounded like fragments of words, my name a warning, a plea. I froze, Footsteps echoed behind me, soft at first, then heavier, matching my own pace. My flashlight flickered, casting trembling shadows across tombstones that seemed to lean closer with each passing second. When I spun around, though, there was nothing, only the fog, rolling and swirling like restless spirits. Then I saw it again. The child, standing near a crumbling mausoleum, her small frame illuminated by an otherworldly glow. Her pale skin reflected the weak moonlight, her eyes wide and unblinking. She lifted a tiny hand and beckoned me closer. Yet the further I moved toward her, the more distant she seemed to become. The air around me grew colder, so cold that it burned through my hoodie, and I could see my breath fogging in tight little clouds. I noticed the inscriptions on nearby tombstones, some etched deeply, others barely legible, but there were words that didn't belong, scratches scrawled as though clawed into the stone. Don't look back. Keep moving. My pulse quickened. Was this a warning from the living? Or the dead? I took a tentative step closer to the child, compelled by something I couldn't name. Every instinct screamed to run, but a strange, sorrowful magnetism held me in place. As I reached the mausoleum, the fog thickened into a nearly solid wall, forcing me to squint through the beam of my flashlight. Shadows danced across broken gravestones, stretching unnaturally as if alive. And then I felt it, a brush of cold, almost like fingers grazing my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. But the weight of unseen eyes pressing down on me made it impossible to move. Then the whispers grew louder, overlapping into a chorus, some pleading, some warning, some crying out for help. I realized they were the voices of children, lost long ago, trapped in this cemetery, their stories unfinished. My stomach churned as a horrible truth began to surface. The child I had seen, Lily, was one of them, one of the forgotten, left behind, reaching out desperately for someone to see her, to remember her. A sudden movement in the shadows made me stumble back. My flashlight flickered again, and in that brief stutter of light I glimpsed dozens of pale figures, ghostly children, watching me from the fog. Each pair of eyes told a story of fear, abandonment, and longing. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of their presence pressing in from every direction. My legs shook, but my mind, though terrified, knew what had to be done. I had entered the graveyard expecting dares, adrenaline, and a good story to impress my friends. Instead, I found responsibility. The children weren't here to scare me. They were asking for acknowledgement, for compassion, for someone to carry their memories forward. And in that moment, I understood that this night was no longer just a test of courage. It was a test of humanity. The fog thickened around the mausoleum, and I felt an almost invisible tug, as if the earth itself were guiding me toward the center of the graveyard. I took a deep breath, steadied my shaking hands, and followed the unseen pull, knowing that whatever awaited me, I could no longer turn back. I stumbled into a neglected corner of the graveyard, where the air felt heavier, thicker, as though time itself had slowed in this part of the cemetery. Tombstones leaned at odd angles, some cracked and covered in moss, others crumbling into dust. The wind whispered through the skeletal trees, carrying a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. My flashlight flickered again, the beam barely penetrating the fog, revealing broken crypts and shallow graves that had been forgotten for decades. Among the fallen leaves, I noticed scraps of paper fluttering in the wind. Old newspaper clippings, yellowed and brittle, had been caught in the cracks between tombstones. I bent down and picked one up, squinting in the dim light. The headline screamed, "A child missing from school trip never found." The photograph beneath it froze me in place. The small pale girl with wide, terrified eyes looked exactly like the figure I had seen in the fog. Her name, Lily. A wave of nausea swept over me as the realization struck. The pale figure haunting this graveyard was not some random ghost. She was real, once living, abandoned here decades ago. Her story left incomplete. Her spirit tethered to this world by fear and sorrow. I sifted through more clippings, each one telling a similar story. Children left behind, forgotten, their families moving on, but their souls trapped, wandering between tombstones, desperate for acknowledgement. I shivered as I noticed fresh footprints in the damp soil, leading toward a massive mausoleum at the center of the cemetery. The footprints glimmered faintly in the moonlight, as if guiding me. Something in the atmosphere pressed against my chest, the weight of countless unseen eyes watching, judging, pleading. I realized with a sick twist in my stomach that the whispers I had heard were not random. They were voices of these trapped children, calling for help across the decades, seeking recognition, longing for someone to remember them. As I walked, a sudden vision overtook me. I saw Lily clutching the hem of her teacher's coat, her small frame trembling, calling for help that never came. The children around her wept silently, their cries muffled by the fog and the indifference of the world outside. I felt my throat tighten, my stomach knot as the horrifying truth sank in. The graveyard wasn't haunted by evil, but by neglect, by humanity's failure to care, to notice, to remember. The shadows twisted around me, forming vague shapes of children frozen in moments of fear and abandonment. Their eyes locked onto mine, and I felt their silent plea, a mixture of hope and despair, reaching into my very soul. I realized then that I wasn't just a visitor. I had become part of their story. My presence, my recognition, was the first spark of acknowledgement they had received in decades. A sudden gust of wind rattled the broken gates, and I felt a pull from the center of the graveyard, toward the oldest mausoleum. It wasn't malevolent, it was guiding me, urging me to step forward to confront what had been left undone for so long. Every instinct screamed for me to run, but I couldn't. Not when the weight of so many forgotten lives rested upon me, and in that heavy, fog-shrouded silence, I understood. The terror of this place was not just in its shadows or whispers. It was in the unfinished stories of children whose lives had been cut short, whose spirits yearned for remembrance. The graveyard demanded something from me, not fear, not fleeing, but courage, compassion, and the willingness to honor what had been forgotten. I swallowed hard, bracing myself for the center of the graveyard where truth awaited, and I knew that this night would test not just my bravery but my humanity. The center of the graveyard felt different. The fog was denser here, curling around me like icy fingers, yet the oppressive silence was pierced by faint whispers, some pleading, some crying, some hesitant, waiting. I stepped onto the uneven ground, my flashlight revealing a chaotic tangle of broken tombstones, toppled statues, and moss-covered crypts that leaned like ancient sentinels. Every shadow seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching for me, testing my resolve. My heart pounded in my chest, and yet, despite the fear gnawing at my bones, I felt an unshakable pull forward. Then I saw them, pale figures, small and trembling, emerging slowly from the fog. Children. Their eyes were wide, reflecting centuries of sorrow, fear, and loneliness. And there in the middle was Lily, the girl who had haunted my steps since I first entered the cemetery. She was staring at me, her expression a mixture of hope and distrust, her small hand trembling as she raised it slightly. I dropped to my knees, lowering my flashlight, my voice trembling as I spoke. I see you. I hear you. You are not forgotten. The fog swirled around us, thickening as if testing the sincerity of my words. The children shuffled closer, cautious but drawn by the warmth of my voice. The air felt electric, charged with decades of grief and longing. I could feel it pressing against my chest, heavy but alive. I realized that this was no ordinary haunting. These spirits were trapped not by malice but by neglect. They needed acknowledgement, compassion, someone to see them, someone to carry their memory forward. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the small bouquet of flowers I had brought, placing them gently on a broken grave near Lily. The petals were soft against the cold, damp earth, and I could swear the pale glow around the children intensified as I arranged them. I spoke again, softly, telling them their stories mattered, that their lives, even if brief, were remembered now. And then I knelt and lit the candles I had brought, their warm light cutting through the icy fog. The shadows around the mausoleum seemed to retreat, and the children stepped closer, their faces softening. Some smiled, tentative at first, then brighter, as if a weight they had carried for decades had been lifted. The wind howled through the trees, rustling the leaves, shaking the tombstones, but I remained on my knees, steadying myself. And then it happened, the most surreal, heart-stopping moment of my life. The children's ghostly forms flickered like candle flames, overlapping, blending, moving with a freedom they hadn't known for decades. Lily stepped forward, smiling for the first time, her eyes reflecting warmth and gratitude. The air around us seemed to shimmer, heavy sorrow replaced by fragile hope. I realized that in this night of terror, my act of empathy had bridged the impossible gap between the living and the dead. Courage wasn't just about facing fear. It was about understanding, reaching out, and honoring what had been forgotten. And in that moment I understood that the graveyard, though eerie and terrifying, had given me a gift, the chance to witness redemption. Even in the shadows as I stood, brushing the cold damp earth from my hands, the children lingered, their small forms glowing softly in the moonlight. Lily looked at me one last time, her hand raised in silent gratitude before slowly fading back into the mist. I knew that their stories, their lives, would now be carried forward, no longer trapped in the shadows. The first rays of dawn began to pierce through the dense fog, brushing the graveyard in pale gold and soft amber. The chilling shadows of the night were receding, replaced by a quiet serenity I hadn't expected to find here. I stood at the center of the cemetery, the cold dew soaking my shoes, my hands still trembling from the encounter with Lily and the other children. The air felt lighter now, almost breathable, as if the heavy sorrow that had clung to this place for decades had been eased by the smallest act of recognition and compassion. The children's forms lingered for a brief moment, hovering in the soft morning light. They were no longer trembling. Their expressions carried a fragile peace, a calm born from finally being seen and remembered. Lily appeared one last time, stepping forward with her small hand raised in a silent wave. Her smile was luminous, filled with gratitude, a warmth that cut through the lingering chill in my bones. I swallowed hard, unsure if I was witnessing the impossible, yet undeniably feeling its truth. As I slowly backed away, the fog dissipated completely, revealing rows of tilted and cracked tombstones bathed in sunlight. The graveyard still held an eerie quality, the distant cries of crows, the occasional rustle of leaves, but it no longer felt malevolent. The air was heavy with memories, yes, but it also carried a fragile sense of hope, as though the children's stories, once trapped in sorrow, had finally been set free. I glanced down at my camera and notes, realizing the weight of the responsibility I now bore. These weren't just ghost stories for thrill or entertainment. They were reminders of lives that mattered, lives that had been overlooked, and the importance of compassion, empathy, and memory. I promised myself that I would honor them, telling their stories so they would never be forgotten. A soft breeze brushed past my face, carrying a whisper almost too faint to hear. "Thank you. Don't forget us." I shivered, but this time not from fear, rather from a profound mix of awe and humility. I had entered the graveyard seeking a thrill, a story to impress my friends. I had found something far more enduring, a lesson in humanity, a reminder that courage sometimes means facing the unknown, and empathy sometimes means confronting sorrow that has lingered far too long. Turning toward the exit, I paused for one final glance at the iron gates and the rows of gravestones. The cemetery looked ordinary now, peaceful in the early light, yet I knew it carried the invisible weight of countless untold stories. The fog had lifted, but the memories remained etched into my mind, a haunting reminder that fear can coexist with compassion, and darkness can illuminate courage. I walked away slowly, the soft crunch of fallen leaves underfoot, blending with the distant calls of birds waking to morning. I felt a subtle warmth in my chest, a reassurance that Lily and the other children were finally at peace. And yet just as I reached the edge of the cemetery, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper followed me on the wind. "Don't forget us." I smiled softly, a shiver running down my spine, knowing I never would. Their voices, their stories, and their longing for recognition would stay with me forever. The graveyard, once a place of fear and sorrow, had transformed into a testament of courage, compassion, and remembrance, a haunting reminder that even in the darkest places, humanity can shine through. As I stepped beyond the gates and into the light of day, I realized something profound. The true horror of this world isn't always in what scares us. It's in what we fail to see, what we fail to remember, and the lives we leave unacknowledged. But even in that darkness, there is hope, there is redemption, and there is the power of one person's courage to make a difference.